Recording on location from Leadership Institute at the Lake of the Ozarks, this is Public Affairs Director Matthew Huffman, and this is Momentum, a webcast produced by your coalition, connecting advocates across our state. In this episode, like I mentioned, we are recording on location at Lake of the Ozarks, and this is actually an inaugural episode of sorts because it's the first time I will be speaking with 4 different directors of member programs from across the state. So I am actually going to go ahead and just let them introduce themselves.
Hi, this is Jessica Woolbright from St. Martha's Hall in St. Louis. I am currently the Children's Program Coordinator, but January 1, I will be the new Executive Director of St. Martha's.
Hi, my name is Teresa Price. I'm the Executive Director of the Agape House Incorporated of Mountain View. I have held that position for 7 years, but I have been with Agape House for 18.
Hello, I'm Marcia Keene Fry. I'm currently the CEO at Susanna Wesley Family Learning Center, located in Mississippi County, Missouri, in the Boot Hill. I've been the CEO since 2015, but have been with the agency since 1996.
Hi, I'm Betty Pannier. I'm with the Regional Family Crisis Center in Perryville, and that is located approximately 80 miles south of St. Louis. I am the retiring executive director, and I am looking forward to that.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for being here and agreeing to be on the webcast with me. I'm excited to be chatting with you all, especially as we all just got in today and are getting ready to kick off Leadership Institute tomorrow morning. So thanks for being here.
You're welcome.
And just a quick congratulations to you, Betty, on your retirement.
Thank
a very well-deserved one. So I'm excited that you are joining us for Leadership Institute once again and being able to share your words of wisdom with everybody as you are about to go and enjoy your retirement.
Yes, thank you, Matthew. I am looking forward to that. After 17 years of being with the shelter, I'm ready for some Betty time.
Yeah, well-earned Betty time.
Yes.
So I kind of just wanted to give our listeners a bit of background about you all. So I appreciate you introducing yourselves with your name, where you're from, but just also wanted to give folks some context. I know that all of you kind of mentioned how long you've been at your program, but how did you get started in this work?
So I, in my undergraduate work, did a practicum at St. Louis County Prosecuting Attorney's Office in their Victim Service Unit with really no desire to work with battered women, but that was 95% of my caseload, assisting women in filing for orders of protection and then going with them to the full hearing. And after that, I was hooked. I was starting graduate school right after finishing that practicum. And very much at that point knew I wanted to stay in the field of working in domestic violence, but had always had my heart set on working with children. So when there was an opening at St. Martha's in the children's program, it was a perfect fit.
Yeah.
And the rest is history because I started part-time and have never left.
Yeah. So you found a good fit, and
perfect fit,
even if it wasn't exactly what I
thought I wanted.
Yeah,
exactly.
Turned out to be the perfect fit after all.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thanks. How about you, Teresa?
Well, actually, I got into this work by accident. Somebody just called me and asked me if I would consider working for Agape House, and I didn't even know what that was. And I had been in a horrible, abusive relationship, and I went for an interview, and I started work the next day, and I've been there ever since. I started out not knowing anything about advocacy, knew all about being a victim, but I didn't know anything about advocacy, and so I just worked my way into, and it was so intriguing to me that I took it upon myself to educate myself every way I could about this kind of work.
Yeah.
And the coalition's been a big influence in my stay at Agape House.
Yeah. Well, we're very glad that you decided to stay at Agape House too.
Thank you.
Yeah. How about you, Marcia?
Well, it's kind of a strange little story. I was living in St. Louis and doing a practicum at Epworth Children's Home. I knew I wanted to work with children. At the time, Susanna Wesley Family Learning Center, located in my hometown, was called Epworth Boot Hill. So it was a pilot project of Epworth Children's Home. I had no intention of moving back home, but I was coming home for the weekend. I was potty training my daughter. We stopped at a Dairy Queen in St. Genevieve, and the executive director at the time was also stopping at going the opposite. She was going to Epworth Children's Home. Stopped. We met in that parking lot. Ended up talking for about an hour. She asked me if I'd ever thought about moving home, and I said possibly. Called me on that Sunday night, offered me a job, said we're going to be starting a domestic violence program. Do you think you can do that? I was 24. I was in an abusive relationship. I didn't know it exactly. I knew my husband was an alcoholic, but I didn't have the knowledge or the words to realize the rest of the problem. So anyway, I moved back home with my daughter. I was pregnant with my son, who is now 23. Took the job, realized very quickly that my situation was much worse than I thought it was. Did as much as I could to educate myself and developed a victim services program and have been there ever since.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
How about you, Betty?
Well, I lived in Florida, and my mother got sick, and I moved back home after being in Florida for 17 years, and I moved back home to take care of my mother. Of course, I had to find a position, and when I applied for the job, I had no idea it was a domestic violence shelter, regional family crisis center. Could be, a number of things. And so then I found out what the job actually entailed and really got very interested because I was a victim of domestic violence at one time. So I did get the position, and I was hired as a volunteer coordinator and stayed in that position until 5 years ago, and the director at that time contracted cancer and passed away, and so they asked me to be the director, and that was 5 years ago.
Okay. So I know that this is really similar to, I think, a lot of conversations we end up having with folks from other programs across our state, where maybe we didn't initially think we were going to get started out doing this work, but then once you're in it forever. You're hooked. And that's something that I think is really important to highlight and to share with one another. So I really appreciate you all sharing your stories behind how you got into this work, because I think that's a commonality that really connects a lot of us. Is, many of us have either personally experienced violence, or we have close friends or family members who have. But yeah, once you get started in the work, I think it's something that we realize just how vast it is, and how many people are affected by it, and how many people we know who have personal experiences. And so I see that as a common thread when I have these conversations with folks, not only around Missouri, but whenever we go to national meetings as well. Is that it's a very common thread that I think a lot of us have. So kind of thinking about that a little more, in terms of how you got started in this work, is there any one thing that y'all can think of that has really kept you going since you got started? Because, sometimes we have really hard days, and so it's also important to be able to have that support system with others, either in our own office spaces or just with our peers. And that's a big part of leadership, is being with our peers. So what's something that's kind of kept you motivated since you've been in your jobs?
I will speak to that. One of the things that has been very important to me is having the coalition to call on at different times for different reasons, and they've always been there. They've always been there, regardless of what the situation is. I can't tell you the number of times I've called Lars on and talk to her about different situations. And Janelle Williams, Zach, different people, Cheryl, and I appreciate that support that the coalition has always been there for me.
Oh, thanks, Betty.
I think for me, I mean, it's just simply we save lives and we change lives, and our programs are varied and don't always look the same. But at the end of the day, we're all in the same business. And I mean, I've always been able to call any other member program and get support, or even colleagues within my own agency. You don't always feel supported by your community or people in general, but within our own programs and our own coalition of membership programs, there's just always that support, and that's why too being here is so important, because you're among your kind, and you're not always among your kind.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that's kept me connected is I had never ever talked about the abuse myself until I went to work at the Agape House, and it helped me heal. And I think in that healing process and learning how to move past the past abuse that I had experienced, that it helped me get my footing and my grounding. And then when Joanne passed away suddenly and I became the executive director, I was on the phone with the coalition every other day. And I went to the Directors Academy and I cried for 8 months because it was so traumatizing for all of us. And I don't think I'd have made it if I could not have had somebody on the other end of that phone that I could just pick up that phone and say, I don't know how to do this. And they taught me through it, walked me through it, and here I am today.
I think to echo what everyone else has sort of said around the table is just that support that you receive. So I have been very lucky, and that from the day I started doing this, there have been so many women for me to learn from, whether that's my coworkers or other women who maybe don't work at the shelter but work in the community, and even the residents that we see every day. I learn something. So while there's definitely days that are terrible and you don't know how you're going to keep putting one foot in front of the other, it doesn't feel like a job. It doesn't feel like work. It feels like something so much bigger than that. And it's just a part of who you are. So I don't even really think anymore about what keeps me in this or why do I keep doing this, because it would be the same as saying, how do you stay connected to your left arm? I don't know. It's just there. It's just part of it, and really trying to learn from all of those women who have come before me and not make things harder than they need to be.
Yeah, as I was hearing you all kind of share that, it made me realize that that all 5 of us have worked in shelter, and just that dynamic and how working in shelter is a whole that's a whole other episode, right? And just communal living and the dynamics there. But yeah, that was my first job out of undergrad, was working overnight in my local shelter, and I absolutely loved it. And yeah, sometimes it was really hard, but there were also just really amazing moments of being awake at 2 a.m. and back in the kitchen eating cheese with some of the other residents and just like talking and really connecting with each other. And I think that those are really important moments that we all hold on to.
I agree, Stephanie.
Yeah, I'm sometimes jealous of advocates and shelter staff at this point, because I know it's very stressful. I'm not, underscoring that at all, but those are the moments that keep you going and keep you motivated. Filling out the paperwork and doing all the compliance is not so motivating, but being able to sit down and have a conversation with a resident, that's something golden that I don't think when you're in the thick of that and you're kind of stressed out by the chaos or whatever, that you really realize that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I'm jealous sometimes.
I am too. I'm very jealous.
I jump at those chances when there's a newborn baby or something in shelter and someone was like, oh my gosh, we can't get him to sleep. Okay, I'll do it. I'll rock him. I'll do it. Yeah. Because you have to feel connected to what you're doing.
Well, and that's just like, we all wear 21 hats, bar none. I mean, we just do. And this last couple months, we've had so many people and not enough space for them to go. And so many are not going to leave the area that they're going to go back. That keeps you searching for an expansion and a way to help more people every day. And some of the stories are so horrific that you just want to go home and cry, because somebody went back to that because there was nowhere for them to go. And that's one of our biggest issues is we serve such a large area with so minimal resources, but if we can just help them, that's what. And then our advocates, that's what we're about. We're about helping them. And then there's days that I miss going to court. I'm going to tell you, handing off some of the things was the hardest things I ever done, because I was the legal advocate, and where we're at, we do all the transports, and they're extremely dangerous. And we had one a couple of weeks ago, and to let my new legal advocate go by herself, even though she had a police escort, it was terrible. I was on pins and needles until her and the other one that went with her got home, because I had to know they were okay. I had to know they didn't get killed in the process of what they were doing.
Yeah.
So it's been, the transitions, and we've all made those transitions. Transition is hard, but the coalition's been there to help us. And then the other programs that we can reach out and say, how did you do that? So that makes all the difference.
When you have a success story about one of the clients, it is so rewarding.
It is.
And we do have some unsuccessful stories. I mean, we all do. But when you start having those success stories, there's just no words.
No.
And I define success so much differently now than I would have 20 years ago. 20 years ago it was, well, if she leaves shelter and gets her own house and never sees them again, right? Like, all like perfect. Well, nobody has that perfect world. And now it's like, she kept a job for 3 months. She paid that utility bill, whatever it might be. You learn to appreciate those so much more, because she had to work sometimes twice and 3 times as hard as anybody else to get that to happen.
It's true.
So I want to kind of jump back just a moment and stick on this topic of transitions, because I think that's a really important thing to kind of lift out of having the 4 of you as part of this conversation. Because we have people transitioning out to retirement, transitioning in to a new role, and all of you have had the experience of transition through your program. So can y'all kind of speak to the highs and lows of what that's like?
It's a nightmare. That's the low.
The low.
The high is that when you get your footing, you have to decide on what you're going to hang on to that was handed to you, and learn from those that, built this from the ground up, and then what are you going to transition to? And it's a balancing act of learning to let go and to move forward. I've found that, and it's slow go. And sometimes you hold on to things that a little too long, and you wish you'd have let them go a little sooner. And sometimes you let go of things that you wish you'd have held on to. It has been a real learning curve, because like I said, I was a legal advocate, and I didn't have any idea. I'd been the grant writer for years, but I didn't have any idea about running the facilities. And I come in just as VOCA was getting ready to blossom, and we were going to be able to hire somebody instead of somebody work 3 shifts straight in a row. And so I've seen the growth just in the early years of being the executive director, and the transitions have been many, but they've been worth every tear I've cried along the way. And the coalition's been there. And I call them and say, well, I really goofed. And they say, well, it's not over. I mean, sometimes you feel like it's over. Sometimes you feel like you messed up and there's no way to pull yourself out of the pond you just jumped into because it's all mud. Mm-hmm. But I have, and then I have a fantastic board of directors that are there standing behind me saying, okay, we'll get through this. Right along with the coalition and those programs.
So, for me, I was perfectly happy with being Director of Victim Services. I felt comfortable in that. I loved it. I loved what I did. I kind of built that program from the ground up because we do other things at our agency too, youth services and adult education, job training, things like that. So I felt really comfortable in the role as Victim Services Director. But our founding director was retiring, and she was kind of the face of the agency. And so I knew that transition was going to be really tough. I knew from being there it would be almost impossible for somebody from the outside to come in. There wasn't a lot of transition. We knew she was retiring, but it was kind of like one day she was there and then one day she was gone because I think it was very hard for her to leave. And so I decided to step into that role. Not because that's necessarily what I wanted to do, but because I was afraid what would happen if I didn't. We had a lot of things to overcome. We were in bad financial shape. Our building was falling apart. I mean, our policies were 20 plus years old, et cetera, et cetera. So I kind of knew what I was getting into. Not 100%, but I knew there were going to be some problems. So the lows were transition, not only taking over as executive director, but also we got 2 new buildings, sold a building, renovated buildings, had to figure out our financial situation, fix some problems programmatically and policy-wise. And not everybody can make a transition, no. Especially when, some of my colleagues had worked for the same director I had for 20 years. So learning to not take that personally, that not everybody can make it through the transition. And I went to a leadership training that the United Methodist Church put on not long after I took over because we are affiliated with the United Methodist Church, and it was about transition, and they did a transition curve, and that was one of the things. They actually have a person that goes in and helps agencies within their conferences transition, and this person goes in and sometimes they get rid of the entire staff or sometimes they have to do really drastic things, and she talked about letting go of sacred programs or things like that and making those tough decisions. And I don't think if I hadn't heard that from somebody, I would have taken that all personally, and I'm not sure I would have made it through that. It's been a really tough few years. I did have some really good staff that came alongside and helped. I got lucky, had an intern come in who was young, vibrant, helped through that transition. I had, sister programs, Marianne Allen and Martha Sander I had on the phone almost on a daily basis, if for no other reason than just to vent. Marianne was actually my mentor when I first started in this field. So, her experience has been invaluable over the years. And the coalition as well, being able to call them and ask about policy issues and legal issues and just things we needed to fix. All of that was the lows. The high of it is now being almost 5 years into it and looking back at what's happened. Sometimes it kind of makes me nervous when I look at it because, our finances are better. We've lost a lot of staff and replaced a lot of staff, changed some programs, but we're in a good place and really ready to continue to move forward. So it's just being able to take a step back from all of that really hard work and really tough times and realize you didn't do everything right, but you did the best you could, and take a moment just to step back and look at it and realize we're just about through this transition. I hope. Better knock on some wood.
For me, when I first started in 2002, I went through the first year, having a director that was misappropriating funds, and they let her go. And then another director was hired, and she went through the first year, and then she was fired. So that was kind of a very unstable time, and I'm saying, let's get somebody in here who can give the right guidance and direction that we need. From there, we had a director was hired. This is the one who passed away with cancer. So she was there for quite a number of years. And I have to admit, this was a very hard situation. We were one of the programs that did no shelter rules, and that was very difficult for a lot of us to get used to, coming from a space of lots of rules, many more rules than we should have ever had. I look back on that time now and say, did we really do this? Which we did. And then we went from that to a no rules program. So that was a big adjustment for not only myself, but for some of the other advocates there. But we did get through that, and we are in a really good space now, as far as the guidelines. I don't call them rules, I call them guidelines, because all the guidelines are meant to be broken. You cannot have a set of guidelines and have it to be strictly for every single person who walks through that door. It does not work.
No, it doesn't.
So, as a matter of fact, Laura Zahn had come down and read our guidelines and said, this is some of the best I've seen. Would you mind if I used it as an example? And so I was very proud of that. But I think that we are in a really, really good place at this time. We did start a thrift store 3 years ago, and that's been very successful. There's a lot of things that I did not have a chance to do when I was director, like the new policies that needed to be written, because we still have the old policy book that we've been operating on for many years. Just things like that needed to be updated. So now what we've done with the new VOCA money, effective October 1st, hopefully, we have someone who is going to be a program manager, and then we have the new executive director. So the program manager will have a lot of responsibility that I had before, being the executive director. So hopefully with the division of those two positions, it's going to make it easier on everyone. There's going to be more time now to actually, for the director to do the administrative work. So I'm really happy with where we are right now.
Good.
Yeah.
So I'm on the other end of the transition, and just starting. So here, I'm not surprised by anything that anyone has said, but St. Martha's is really unique. We've been open for 37 years and have had the same executive director for 37 years.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's amazing. So, it's Michelle in so many ways is St. Martha's. Right. So right now, for me, the biggest struggle is like letting her go
Yeah.
while also, and I don't even look at it like I've got big shoes to fill, because that's so cliche. It doesn't even begin to touch how I feel about it. But she's been a mentor to so many people and has been a support person and a confidant and just everything to so many people, that to even know where to begin with that is really scary. Marcia, when you were talking about like one of the main reasons you did it is because you knew it had to be somebody from the inside. I felt the exact same way. I was sitting in the interview with the board, and they said, well, what happens if you don't get this? And I said, then I go back to being the happiest children's program coordinator around, because I would be just fine with doing that, fully well knowing that my job was going to look very different if we hired somebody from the outside, because it's shelters are already these weird wild beasts, and then have somebody who's never been there. So it's why I wanted to come to leadership this week. It's why I tried to reach out to so many people, knowing that it takes a village, but also knowing that I've got that village, right? So I don't have to start over. I don't have to reinvent the wheel. I just have to do what I know is right, trust my instincts, trust what I've learned from Michelle and so many other people. And I'm not trying to make it sugar coated or make it sound like I think it's going to be easy, because I know there's rough roads, but it helps knowing that all those people are there.
In my transition, the resentment from staff was the biggest issue I think I ever faced.
Oh, wow.
Because everybody considered themselves equals, and we really were. And then all of a sudden I was the executive director. I lost all my staff but one. And you want to talk about starting over and restructuring, and that's when I called the coalition, and I was such a mess because I didn't know where to go from there. When you lose your staff because they resent the fact that one of their peers is now in charge, it's very difficult.
See, I've had that problem with trying to move people into my previous position. I've hired from the outside and it didn't work, and I've hired from within and it's been a struggle, because as long as I'm still there, then it's staff don't want to take direction from somebody else, and I really need for somebody to be able to be in that role, and it's kind of unfair to every person that tries to step into that role. So that's been a struggle. And then also, we didn't have a lot of turnover amongst the victim service staff, but other staff within the agency that were in other programs that I had been their colleague for a lot of years, other program directors, we had some turnover there because they just were not, because there were things I changed. There were things that I felt like had to be changed, and not everybody loved that. So, and that's been a real hard transition, even from a political perspective in a small community, to lose somebody or lose people who've been with the agency for 20 years. And it's when there's a change in leadership. I remember something that happened one time, the board calling on a Saturday, we need to have a meeting right now. And I had to let somebody go, our financial manager, and so it ended up being fine, and they ended up realizing why I did what I did. But what actually happened was our previous executive director had called the board members and told them I just made a big mistake by letting that happen. Well, it was one of the things that needed to happen most, but I'm sure that she had a panic moment, thinking maybe I didn't really know what I was doing. I'm not really entirely sure what that was all about. But that whole, having everybody at one time question everything you're doing, and you have to be prepared to justify why you're doing what you're doing. I just felt like I was under the microscope for a long time. And that was okay, because I was glad people were paying attention to what was happening. They needed to be paying attention. But there are just a few issues with stepping into that role when you're already in the organization too. So there are benefits to it, and there are definitely some drawbacks. And you just have to not, no matter what, you have to try to not take it personally, and that's the hardest thing, is to not take stuff personally.
Well, and we had a person that stepped into, the supervisory role behind me that just started barking orders and not doing anything but bark orders. One of the best things I ever did was hire somebody that was not within the program. And she's amazing. But then pulling staff aboard to respect her and allow her to be in that supervisory role One of the best things we ever did was move my office outside of the facility. When they move my office outside the facility, they have no choice but to go to her. So it makes it a lot easier. But that took 6 years in the making. We had to figure that one out.
Yeah. So a theme that I'm picking up here is transitions are rough. They take time. And I really appreciate that y'all were so candid about that, because I think it's really important for us to be able to sit in that space and recognize that it is really difficult when we're in the midst of transition. But something that I also picked up and that I really loved from hearing you all talk about were the shout outs to sister programs and to mentors that you've had as other advocates at programs and folks you've reached out to at the coalition, but just the strong support system that has really been there to help you through those transitions. And ultimately, that is the essence of Leadership Institute, right?
Yes.
Is to be able to be with other leaders from around the state, connect with them, connect with coalition staff, and really sit in community with one another. And Marcia, something that you said earlier that really stuck with me was being at Leadership, you know that you're around and among your own kind. And so, like, what is the importance of community then? Why is this so important for people?
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that, you know, we have staff meetings once a month, but every morning we have what's called a huddle, and we kind of get our day started and find out what happened the night before and whatever. But during my time as director, I've made a lot of changes, and staff will get very annoyed and frustrated and say, stop changing everything on us. And my response to that is, I hope there's never a day when I will stop changing things, because if you try something and it doesn't work, you try something else. And with being so client oriented, not everything works for everybody, so you're constantly changing things. And I will tell staff, you know, if you feel like you can't handle the changes that we do go through, maybe this is not the position for you. But what I find at the Leadership Institute is, you know, we do get together, we talk with other directors, we talk with the coalition members, and we do talk about things that happen at the center and about our programs. And someone might come up with something that we have not tried before. This worked for them. Well, you know what? That sounds like a pretty darn good idea. Let me try that and see if that works. So I find it really, really beneficial to come and speak with other directors, other program managers, and everybody at the coalition. Thank you for that.
Yeah, well, thank you all for attending.
So obviously it's my first one, so I can't say, but the one thing that I have learned through the years, working at St. Martha's and working with the women that I work with, that there is no end to the power that women have when they work together. That when women work together, we can move mountains. There's a saying at St. Martha's that somebody found one time that said, when sleeping women rise, mountains move. And we all kind of laugh about it because we're like, that's so true, but oh my gosh, we're so tired. Can you just let us sleep for a little bit? Like, we'll move mountains tomorrow. But
And that is true.
Yeah. But yeah, so just the power in that, a good power in that, is inspiring.
It is. Well, you know, we learn from each other. We can vent our frustrations to each other. One thing at Leadership, you learn you're not an island to yourself.
Yes.
You're not in this big ocean of victim services by yourself. We're here to address the issues of domestic and sexual violence, yes, but we're not alone. And sometimes we feel like we're paddling the boat by ourselves with one oar. So we're just going in a circle. But then when we all come together and we listen to each other, and we may not all have the opportunity to talk to every person there, but we learn something from every person there because we get to hear the voice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we hear the coalition with everything they're presenting. We can go to them privately and talk to them, but then we can have those private conversations among ourselves. But then when we start sharing in the room, we all glean from each other. It's one of the best things that's ever happened for me. This is my 6th year, and and I brought Debbie this year because it'll be her first, and I hope she goes back home, rejuvenated. And realizing that, this is hard work, but you're not alone in this work.
For me, it's really the one time a year that I get to sit down with a lot of people who are facing the same issues that I am. Because, we do have regular staff meetings. I talk with staff all the time. I talk with other agency leaders in my area, not victim service agencies, but and they have similar issues. But when you come here, it's like Betty said, it's not a gripe session, but you can bring up problems and things that you're facing, and all of a sudden something that seems so big to you, somebody else has already been through. They have a pretty good plan for handling it, or you just realize you're not alone in it. And it's just, getting to be amongst your peers, because when you talk with your staff, that's a great thing, or being able to call a sister agency on the phone and talk to somebody, that's a great thing, but it's still not the same as being in the presence of a large group of other people who are facing the same things that you're facing and are maybe in the same stage or maybe in a different stage than you're in. I love the fact that when we got to start bringing mental managers a few years ago, because, that gives other people the opportunity to learn things and grow and hopefully be able to, move into our roles at some point in the future. And also I think it's been very helpful too. They learn things that help them understand where we're coming from. We learn things that help us understand where they're coming from. I think that's been a really great addition. I've been with Susanna Wesley 24 years. I really only remember not being in leadership 2 or 3 times that I can remember. I've been here in a wheelchair with a broken leg. I've been here while on maternity leave with a brand new baby. It's that important to me to be here, really no matter what. It just kind of just refuels your batteries, I guess.
So I want to lift out a couple things that y'all said, just in terms of, yes, it's really important that we are able to be here in community with one another, but also how important it is that we really acknowledge those who came before us, mm-hmm. and being able to learn from one another. So this is kind of a 2-part question. So 1, what is the best advice you've ever been given? And then 2, what advice do you have for the next generation of advocates coming up into the work now?
I think it took my answer, because one of the things I learned was learn from those that came before you. So that would be one. I think the other thing that we have a saying at St. Martha's, that if you do everything from a base of love, you're going to make the right decision. So we obviously have to have really hard, really tough conversations with women.
That's actually the perfect cut-in, because as we know from working in shelters and crisis programs, sometimes your phone is going to go off.
Right. But you can still have those really hard, tough conversations if you're doing it from a base of love, and you're doing it because you truly care about that person, and telling them what they need to hear as opposed to what they want to hear in that moment is not always the fun place to be. But when you are on this journey with people, it is what it is. You have to be able to have those tough conversations. So I try to remember that.
Yeah.
Someone told me something many, many years ago, and what they said to me was, don't ever lose your integrity. And I think that is what I would pass on to my new director or to anyone new coming into the business. And what they said was, when you lose your integrity, you lose your self-worth. And that always really, really stuck with me. Working in a shelter, if you lose your integrity and you lose your self-worth, that is generalized through your staff, through all clients, and that is one thing that you do not want to do with clients or your staff, is let them see that you no longer have integrity, and that you've lost yourself, because that could have far-reaching effects on both clients and staff.
Mm-hmm.
One of the best pieces of advice I was ever given was, I was 24 years old, and a local attorney had called me a bitch. What he actually said was, "Man, you're a bitch when it comes to these children's issues, or you're being a bitch when it comes to these children's issues," because I was advocating for some kids. And it really hurt my feelings. And I remember another shelter director saying, "Do not take it personally when people you're going up against call you a bitch, because that means you're rocking their world." And so there have been many times over the years, I haven't necessarily been called that name repeatedly, thank goodness, but where people were not real happy with me, and I knew as long as I was coming from a place of integrity and doing what I needed to be doing, that was okay. I'm not sure I would have been tough enough to make it in this field as a very young person, and taken that from, in such a small community where you see people all the time, if I hadn't gotten that piece of advice from somebody who had come before me and obviously had probably been there before. And the advice I would give to the next generation is don't take offense to everything, as long as you're doing your job and you're doing it with integrity, and you're not necessarily in people's face, but you're doing what needs to be done. If people don't like you all the time, that's okay. And to pace yourself, because if you don't pace yourself and you don't take care of yourself as best you can, you're not going to be here long term.
For me, words that echo in my ears were from a very kind elderly gentleman in our church. And he looked at me, and he always called me kid. He said, "If you never hear anything else I tell you, just remember, a little time and a few kind words go a long way." That is stuck in my mind, and I hear it every day. I've heard it for 30 years. I hear it every day. And that's the one thing I try to pass on. You know, the work we do is hard work. We're going to see people who are broken in every way they can be broken. But a little time and a few kind words go a long way. And then what Joanne once said to me when I would fall apart at work, and I miss her really bad, was, "What can't be cured must be endured." You know, look for that cure. But until that cure comes, endure and persevere. That would be my advice.
Those are all really beautiful pieces and really inspiring pieces of advice that you all have received, and I really appreciate you sharing these, because again, I think it's really important that we support one another in the work. So I'm excited for other people to hear that and draw strength from it too. So in our webcast, I normally like to end on a little bit of a lighter note. And I feel as though I would be remiss if I did not recognize that my husband gave me this suggestion. So we're at Leadership Institute, where we are among other leaders and managers, and this week was also the boss's birthday when Bruce Springsteen turned 70 years old. So I want to go around and just ask, what is your favorite Bruce Springsteen song?
Speaking of transitions, like you really transitioned into that.
Matthew, would you like to go first?
Yeah.
Well done there, Betty. I don't think I really need to give mine, because I'm the interviewer, so I get to ask you all. I'm highlighting your expertise here.
Good comeback. Okay. I really enjoy the song that he sings called "My Hometown." It's just a good song. I can't tell you all of the words unless I listen to it, but I like the song.
Okay, so this gives me panic. Born in the USA is the song that comes to mind. Not so much because of the words, but I remember the video, and he had it was a butt shot with some really good looking jeans. I remember that. But no. So there's that. And Born in the USA, I guess I have to still be thankful and proud every day that I am born in the USA, even though sometimes I'm not real happy with the way everything is going right now. So I'll give the shout out to the jeans. We're still happy.
They haven't disappointed yet.
They have not disappointed yet. And my husband would be so disappointed. So I asked him, and he said dance in the dark.
Well, I have to say, I'm kind of torn between born in the USA, because I am very thankful to be born in the USA. We've got our troubles. We're still the greatest nation as of yet in the world, and that's my opinion about the USA. We got a lot of problems, but you don't have to go very far to find more. And I do like that song, but honestly, if I'm going to tap my foot to the music, it's going to be Dancing in the Dark.
So the funny part is that we all had to Google this before we could answer, because we didn't. We realized we liked his songs after we looked at what he's saying. But the one that stuck with me when looking through all the songs was "Blinded by the Light," because I thought it's really appropriate for the work that we're doing here. We all beg for that light at the end of the tunnel, and then we're blinded by it when we get it. So.
And I love that song.
Yeah, very well said. All right. Well, I want to thank y'all so much for taking time to sit down and talk with me, to share your stories, your expertise. And I really appreciate that. And I think that all of our listeners really will too. So thank you.